Dracula, an original abridged adaptation, inspired by Bram Stoker's classic Gothic novel. Welcome. Tonight, journey into one of the greatest Gothic tales ever told. This is Dracula, a fresh retelling that preserves the heart, atmosphere, and unforgettable characters of the original while presenting the story as a shorter narrative. Follow Jonathan Harker as an ordinary business trip leads him to a lonely castle deep within the Carpathian Mountains, where an enigmatic count waits in the shadows. From there, the story unfolds across windswept coastlines, ancient cemeteries, and moonlit streets, as a small group of determined friends confront an evil older than memory itself. So, dim the lights, settle into a comfortable chair, or simply close your eyes and allow your imagination to wander. Let the story begin. There are places in the world where history seems reluctant to die. Among the towering peaks of the Carpathian Mountains, where ancient forests cling to the slopes and wolves still answer the moon, old stories survive long after sensible men have dismissed them. The villagers speak quietly when darkness falls. They bless themselves at lonely crossroads and hurry indoors before sunset. To strangers these customs appear quaint, remnants of another age. Yet those born beneath those mountains know that some legends are remembered because they are true. Into this forgotten corner of Europe travelled Jonathan Harker, a young solicitor from London. He was practical, educated, and quietly ambitious. His life was ordered by contracts, deeds, and careful planning, and within a few weeks he hoped to marry the woman he loved above all others, Mina Murray. His journey to Transylvania seemed no more than a final business obligation before beginning the peaceful future they had planned together. His client was an elderly nobleman who wished to purchase an ancient estate in England. The correspondence had been courteous. The payment had been generous. Nothing appeared unusual. Yet as Jonathan travelled eastward, the familiar comforts of Western Europe slowly faded behind him. The broad railways became winding roads. Busy towns gave way to isolated villages. The language changed, the customs changed, and even the landscape seemed to belong to another century. Everywhere he went, people reacted strangely when they learned the name of the gentleman he had come to visit. Count Dracula. Some crossed themselves, others lowered their voices. One innkeeper's wife, upon hearing Jonathan's destination, stared at him with such genuine pity that he felt almost embarrassed for her. "My husband says I should not trouble you," she whispered, pressing a small silver crucifix into his hand. "But tomorrow is St. George's Eve. On such a night, dark things walk freely." Jonathan smiled kindly. "I appreciate your concern." She shook her head. "No, you do not." Not wishing to offend her, he slipped the crucifix into his pocket. He did not believe it would be needed. The following evening, his carriage reached the Borgo Pass, just as the last light disappeared behind the mountains. The coachman refused to travel farther. "The Count has sent another carriage," he said hurriedly. "It will find you." Before Jonathan could ask another question, the village horses became restless. Their ears flattened. They pulled nervously against their harnesses. Then silence fell. Out of the darkness came another carriage, black as polished ebony. Its driver wore a long cloak that concealed almost every feature except two pale hands resting upon the reins. Without speaking, he loaded Jonathan's luggage and motioned for him to climb aboard. The horses sprang forward. They travelled through forests so dense that moonlight scarcely reached the ground. Occasionally, wolves appeared between the trees, their silver eyes watching in perfect silence. Jonathan expected them to attack. Instead, they simply watched the carriage pass. Once or twice the mysterious driver paused beside strange blue flames dancing upon the mountainside. He studied each flickering light with quiet concentration before urging the horses onward once more. Hours passed. Then Jonathan saw it. High above the cliffs, silhouetted against the stars, stood Castle Dracula. Its towers rose like dark spears from the living rock. Great walls crowned the mountain's edge, and narrow windows looked down upon valleys lost beneath drifting mist. It seemed less a home than a fortress built to defy both time and nature. As the carriage entered the courtyard, the enormous doors opened without a sound. An elderly gentleman stepped forward to greet him. He was remarkably tall. His hair and moustache were white. His face possessed an unusual dignity, though its extraordinary paleness gave him the appearance of carved marble rather than living flesh. When he extended his hand, Jonathan was startled by its strength. It felt cold, unnaturally cold. "Welcome to my house," the Count said with measured courtesy. His English was precise, though touched by a curious accent. "You are welcome here of your own free will." Jonathan thanked him warmly. The great hall beyond was magnificent. Ancient banners hung from high stone walls. Massive fireplaces glowed with welcoming flames, and polished oak furniture reflected the flickering candlelight. Yet despite the obvious wealth surrounding him, something felt oddly incomplete. The castle was silent. No servants appeared. No footsteps echoed in distant corridors. No voices drifted through hidden rooms. Only the Count himself attended to every detail. He carried Jonathan's luggage. He served the evening meal. He apologized that he would not dine, explaining simply that he had already eaten. Jonathan accepted the explanation without question. Many wealthy gentlemen possessed eccentric habits. As supper continued, the Count's conversation revealed a remarkable curiosity about England. He asked about London in extraordinary detail. How crowded were its streets? How late did its citizens remain abroad? Could a gentleman walk unnoticed among thousands of strangers? Did neighbours know one another well? How easily might a foreign visitor become simply another face in the crowd? Jonathan answered each question willingly. The Count listened with complete attention, committing every detail to memory. Later, before retiring, Jonathan wandered to the window overlooking the mountains. Far below, countless lights flickered in distant villages. Above them stretched a sky, brilliant with stars. For a moment he thought how delighted Mina would have been by such a view. He smiled as he imagined showing her sketches of the castle upon his return. Then, somewhere beyond the forest, a wolf began to howl. Another answered, then another. Within moments the mountains themselves seemed alive, with mournful voices rising through the night. Jonathan shivered, despite the warmth of the room. When he turned back, Count Dracula was standing silently in the doorway. "The children of the night," the old nobleman said quietly. "What beautiful music they make." Jonathan attempted a smile. The Count's expression remained unreadable. Outside, the wolves continued their haunting chorus until dawn. Morning sunlight reached Jonathan's chamber only faintly, filtered through narrow windows set deep within the ancient walls. He dressed quickly, eager to explore the castle, before resuming his business with the Count. The corridors were vast and beautifully kept, yet curiously lifeless. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors watched from gilded frames, while suits of armor stood silently beside heavy oak doors. Dust touched almost nothing, and yet there was no evidence that anyone besides the Count had walked those halls for many years. Jonathan called once or twice, believing a servant might appear. No one answered. He found the dining room already prepared. Fresh bread, fruit, cheese, and hot coffee waited upon the table, but again he ate alone. Only after breakfast did Count Dracula enter, greeting him with the same quiet courtesy as the night before. Together they spent several hours reviewing deeds, maps, and legal papers relating to the purchase of Blackwood Abbey, an old estate on the outskirts of London. The Count's attention never wandered. When business was complete, however, his questions returned to England. He asked about railway stations, shipping routes, and crowded marketplaces. He practiced unfamiliar English expressions until they sounded entirely natural, repeating Jonathan's pronunciation with remarkable precision. "You learn very quickly," Jonathan observed. The Count smiled faintly. "When one has lived a long time," he replied, "one discovers that survival belongs to those who continue learning." The answer lingered strangely in Jonathan's thoughts. That afternoon he searched for the castle library and found a magnificent room lined from floor to ceiling with books. Many were in English, some were histories. Others described British law, geography, politics, and newspapers from recent years. It was as though the owner had spent decades preparing for a country he had never seen. Jonathan settled into a leather chair and began reading. Hours passed unnoticed. When at last he looked up, evening shadows had filled the room. The Count appeared almost silently beside the fireplace. "I hope you have found pleasant company among my books." "They are remarkable," Jonathan replied. "You seem to know England almost as well as I do." "I know many things about England." The old nobleman's eyes rested upon the flames. "But books cannot teach everything." There was something wistful in his voice, as though he spoke not merely of travel, but of exile. That night Jonathan slept uneasily. He dreamed of wolves moving soundlessly through forests wrapped in silver mist. They did not threaten him. Instead, they watched with patient eyes, as though waiting for a command that had not yet been given. He awoke before dawn. Unable to sleep again, he lit a candle and began shaving before the small mirror above the washstand. As he drew the razor across his jaw, the blade slipped. A tiny cut opened beneath his chin. One crimson drop fell into the basin. Instantly a voice sounded behind him. "You are injured." Jonathan started violently. He had heard no footsteps. The Count stood directly behind him. His gaze remained fixed upon the bead of blood. The warmth disappeared from his expression. His pale eyes seemed to darken with an intense and unsettling hunger. For one alarming moment, neither man moved. Then Dracula stepped forward. His hand rose slowly towards Jonathan's throat. Instinctively, Jonathan drew back. The movement caused the little silver crucifix, forgotten beneath his collar since leaving the village, to fall into view. The Count recoiled, as though struck. His face hardened. Without warning, he swept the shaving mirror from the wall. It shattered across the stone floor. "Mirrors," he said coldly, "encourage vanity." The explanation sounded forced even to Jonathan's ears. A moment later, the Count had regained his composure. He apologized for his temper with perfect politeness, before leaving the chamber as quietly as he had entered. Jonathan stood motionless. Only then did an odd thought occur to him. He had seen the Count approach only after turning around. Not once had he noticed his reflection in the mirror. The idea seemed absurd. He laughed softly at himself. Fatigue, unfamiliar surroundings, and mountain legends were surely playing tricks upon his imagination. Yet as he gathered the broken pieces of glass, he found himself unable to dismiss the memory. Later that morning, he decided to explore farther than before. Several passages ended at heavy oak doors secured by ancient iron locks. Others descended into darkness before being blocked by fallen stone. He tried door after door. Every one was fastened. At last he reached the great entrance hall. The enormous front doors remained firmly barred from within. He examined every latch and bolt he could find. None would move. A strange uneasiness settled over him. He climbed to an upper gallery and looked from one of the narrow windows. The view stole his breath. The castle did not overlook a gentle hillside. It stood upon a sheer precipice. Hundreds of feet below, jagged rocks disappeared into drifting cloud. There was no road visible from this side of the fortress, no neighbouring cottages, no passing travellers. Only cliffs, only forest, only silence. When the Count joined him that evening, Jonathan mentioned the locked doors as casually as he could. "I fear I have become quite lost in your remarkable home." Dracula regarded him steadily. "The castle is very old." "So I have noticed. Many rooms are no longer safe." The Count smiled, though there was little warmth in it. "You are free to enjoy every chamber that is open to you." He paused. "But I ask one thing." Jonathan waited. "Never wonder where the doors are locked." The request was spoken softly, almost kindly, yet it carried the unmistakable weight of a command. That night, Lying awake beneath the carved oak canopy of his bed, Jonathan listened to the wind moving around the towers. The castle no longer felt merely ancient. It felt watchful. He thought of Mina, of London, of familiar streets, bright with lamplight and bustling with ordinary life. For the first time since arriving in Transylvania, a simple, troubling thought entered his mind. If he wished to leave tomorrow. Could he? Several days passed. The Count remained an attentive companion after dark, yet Jonathan never once saw him during daylight. Curiosity slowly became suspicion. Suspicion hardened into certainty. Every exterior door was locked. The great gates remained barred. The windows overlooked impossible drops onto jagged rocks far below. Even the path by which Jonathan had entered had vanished beyond towering cliffs. He searched every corridor he could reach. Every stairway ended at another locked door. Every attempt to leave failed. At last the dreadful truth became impossible to deny. He was no longer a guest. He was a prisoner. One evening the Count spoke more sternly than before. "There are parts of this castle where you must never go." Jonathan promised obedience. The moment Dracula departed, he broke that promise. His only hope lay in discovering some forgotten exit. The forbidden wing was unlike the rest of the castle. Dust lay thick across magnificent furniture. Faded tapestries hung in silent decay. Moonlight poured through tall windows, bathing abandoned chambers in silver light. Exhausted by endless searching, Jonathan rested upon an old couch. The silence soothed him. Before he realized it, sleep overcame him. A faint laugh awakened him. Not one voice. 3! He opened his eyes. 3 women stood watching him. They were astonishingly beautiful. Their pale faces seemed carved from marble, their long hair gleaming softly beneath the moonlight. They moved with impossible grace, drifting rather than walking. Their smiles were warm. Their eyes were not. Jonathan felt every instinct urging him to flee. Instead, he found himself unable to move. One woman knelt beside him. Her face drew closer, closer. Her breath was cool against his skin. Her lips parted, revealing teeth far sharper than nature intended. For one terrifying heartbeat, Jonathan felt both horror and an inexplicable desire to surrender. Then the chamber exploded with fury. Count Dracula appeared as though summoned from the darkness itself. With astonishing violence he seized the nearest woman and flung her backwards. "The man belongs to me," he thundered. The 3 women laughed softly. "When shall we have him?" "When I am finished," Dracula replied. Reluctantly, they withdrew into the shadows, leaving Jonathan trembling and unable to understand whether he had escaped death or merely postponed it. From that night onward, the castle became a place of constant terror. Jonathan dared not sleep deeply. Every corridor felt watched. Every sunset marked another evening spent alone with a man who scarcely seemed human. Determined to learn the truth, he searched wherever he could. At last, he discovered a narrow stair descending beneath the castle. The air grew colder. The smell of damp earth filled the passage. There, inside an ancient crypt, stood dozens of long, wooden boxes filled with soil. Within one lay Count Dracula. His eyes were closed. His skin was deathly pale. Yet, unlike a corpse, he seemed strangely alive. Jonathan stared in horror. Only days earlier the Count had appeared old and frail. Now his face looked younger. His cheeks were fuller. His lips were dark with fresh color. It was as though life itself had returned to him, or perhaps been stolen from someone else. Jonathan seized a heavy shovel. This might be his only chance. If he destroyed the Count now, perhaps he could escape. He raised the weapon high. Before he could strike, the body shifted, not awakening, not moving naturally, but somehow preventing the blow from landing true. The shovel glanced away. The coffin lid swung partly shut. Jonathan stumbled backwards in panic. His opportunity had vanished. Soon afterwards, carts arrived at the castle. Rough-looking men loaded the earth-filled boxes onto waiting wagons. Jonathan watched from a narrow window. His heart sank. The Count was leaving. Not alone, he was carrying his homeland with him. Each box of earth represented another resting place, another refuge, another chance to spread whatever ancient evil had hidden inside these mountains for centuries. If Dracula reached England, Jonathan scarcely dared imagine the consequences. He could not remain imprisoned any longer. Death while escaping seemed kinder than waiting helplessly inside the castle. Late one afternoon, while the Count slept below ground, Jonathan climbed from his window. The castle wall fell almost vertically beneath him. Every handhold threatened to crumble. Far below, rocks waited in silence. Slowly, carefully, he lowered himself from ledge to ledge. The climb seemed endless. At one desperate moment his foot slipped, sending stones crashing into the valley below. He clung to the wall with bleeding hands until his strength returned. Finally, he reached the mountainside. For the first time since entering Castle Dracula, Jonathan stood beyond its walls. Behind him the great fortress loomed against the darkening sky. Ahead lay only wilderness, but wilderness meant freedom. He stumbled into the forest, uncertain whether he would survive the journey. He only knew he could never return. Jonathan Harker wandered the mountains for what felt like an age, driven onward by little more than instinct. Hunger weakened him. Cold rain soaked his clothes. More than once he collapsed upon rough woodland paths, convinced he could go no farther. Eventually, kindly travellers discovered him and carried him to a convent hospital, where devoted sisters nursed him back from the edge of death. Though his body slowly recovered, his mind remained trapped within Castle Dracula. Each night he awoke, convinced he heard wolves beyond the window. Every shadow reminded him of dark corridors. Every dream ended with pale faces bending towards his throat. He began writing everything he could remember, determined that if he should lose his reason, the truth would remain upon the page. When word reached Mina Murray, she left England without hesitation. The cheerful, practical young schoolmistress scarcely recognized the man she found lying in the hospital bed. Jonathan had grown thinner. His confident manner had vanished. Even sunlight seemed unable to chase away the fear lingering in his eyes. She never questioned his story. Whatever impossible horrors he believed he had witnessed, she believed him. If Jonathan said evil walked the earth, then evil walked the earth. They married quietly in the little convent chapel, with only the sisters as witnesses. It was a simple ceremony, no grand celebration, no family gathered nearby, only two people promising that whatever darkness lay ahead, they would face it together. While Jonathan recovered in Europe, strange events unfolded along the Yorkshire coast. The fishing town of Whitby watched a violent storm gather over the North Sea. Waves crashed against the harbour walls. Fishing boats hurried for shelter. Then, through the driving rain, a large Russian schooner appeared. It raced towards the harbour with terrifying speed. No sailor stood at the helm. No voices called from the deck. The ship struck the shore with such force that its mast splintered against the rocks. As crowds rushed forward to help, an enormous black dog leapt from the vessel. Without pausing, it bounded across the sand and disappeared into the churchyard above the cliffs. Searchers boarded the abandoned ship. They found no living crew. The captain alone remained. His body had been tied to the wheel, his hands still gripping the helm as though he had refused to abandon his post, even in death. His journal told a disturbing tale. One by one, the crew had vanished during the voyage. Each disappearance had deepened the survivors' terror. Some claimed they saw a tall figure moving silently across the deck at night. Others refused to speak at all. By the final entry, only the captain remained. He chose to lash himself to the wheel rather than surrender to whatever stalked his ship. Among the cargo were dozens of large wooden boxes filled with ordinary earth. No one suspected they carried anything more dangerous than soil. Before Jonathan's return, Mina had been staying in Whitby with her dearest friend, Lucy Westenra. Where Mina possessed calm determination, Lucy overflowed with warmth and kindness. She laughed easily. She loved deeply. Without intending to, she inspired affection wherever she went. Within a single day, 3 honourable gentlemen asked for her hand in marriage. The first was Dr. John Seward, an intelligent physician who directed a nearby asylum. The second was Quincy Morris, an adventurous American whose courage matched his generosity. The third was Arthur Homewood, a thoughtful young nobleman whose quiet devotion had already won Lucy's heart. Choosing one meant disappointing 2. Lucy accepted Arthur's proposal with genuine happiness. Remarkably, the others bore their disappointment with dignity, promising their friendship would remain unchanged. None of them imagined how soon that promise would be tested. Soon after the mysterious ship arrived, Lucy began behaving strangely. One morning, Mina found her friend wandering the churchyard in her sleep. Lucy seemed completely unaware of where she had been. She remembered nothing upon waking. At first they laughed gently about her sleepwalking. Then it happened again and again. Each morning, Lucy appeared more exhausted. Her skin became pale. Dark shadows formed beneath her eyes. Though she insisted she felt merely tired, Mina sensed something far more troubling. One dawn, while helping Lucy prepare for breakfast, Mina noticed 2 tiny marks upon her friend's neck. They resembled little more than pinpricks. Lucy could not explain them. Neither gave them much thought. Yet Mina could not shake the uneasy feeling they inspired. The decline continued. Lucy's strength faded rapidly. Simple walks left her breathless. Even climbing stairs became difficult. Arthur grew increasingly anxious and called upon Dr. Seward for help. The physician examined Lucy carefully. Her pulse was weak, her colour poor. It seemed as though she were losing blood. Yet no wound could be found. No illness explained her condition. Determined not to fail his friend, Seward wrote immediately to the one man whose experience surpassed his own. Professor Abraham Van Helsing. Van Helsing arrived from Amsterdam carrying little luggage, but an extraordinary reputation. He greeted everyone warmly, speaking with energy that seemed impossible for a man of his years. His eyes, however, missed very little. He listened, he observed, he asked unusual questions. After examining Lucy, he remained silent for a long time. At last he requested something unexpected, fresh garlic flowers. No one understood why. Nevertheless, Arthur hurried to obtain them. Van Helsing placed the flowers around Lucy's room and hung them above her bed. He insisted the windows remain closed after sunset. He asked that Lucy never be left alone. His instructions sounded absurd, yet his expression allowed no argument. Though he offered no explanation, one thought troubled him deeply. He feared Lucy was not suffering from any ordinary disease. She was being visited, night after night, by something that fed upon life itself. For a short while, Lucy seemed stronger. Colour returned to her cheeks. Arthur smiled for the first time in weeks. Everyone hoped the mysterious illness had finally begun to retreat. Then one terrible night, everything changed. Lucy's mother, believing the garlic flowers unpleasant, quietly removed them from the room. A storm broke outside. The wind burst open the window. Lucy awoke screaming. By morning she was weaker than ever before. Whatever had hunted her had returned. Van Helsing said little, but as he looked towards the window, his face revealed the fear he had struggled to hide. The battle had truly begun. Far away, Jonathan and Mina crossed the channel together, unaware that the nightmare Jonathan believed he had escaped had already reached the shores of England. Jonathan and Mina returned quietly to England, hoping to leave the horrors of Castle Dracula behind them. Jonathan resumed his work, though he was no longer the carefree young solicitor who had first travelled to Transylvania. His laughter came less easily. He startled at unexpected noises. Sometimes, without warning, he would fall silent, as though listening for footsteps that no one else could hear. Mina watched over him with gentle patience. She never pressed him to speak of the castle. She simply remained beside him, believing that, in time, peace would return, Instead, darker news arrived. Lucy Westenra had become gravely ill. Arthur scarcely left Lucy's bedside. Each day she seemed a little weaker than the last. Her breathing grew shallow. Her face became almost transparent beneath the candlelight. The tiny wounds upon her neck refused to heal. Dr. Seward exhausted every treatment he knew. Nothing succeeded. Professor Van Helsing alone seemed to expect each fresh setback. He remained constantly alert after sunset, listening to every sound beyond the windows. More than once he found the garlic flowers disturbed, though no one admitted moving them. He quietly replaced them each evening. Then came the first desperate measure. Lucy had lost so much blood that she could scarcely lift her head. Without hesitation, Arthur offered his own. The transfusion restored colour to her cheeks almost immediately. For a single glorious day she smiled again. She recognized those around her. She even laughed softly at Arthur's anxious expression. Hope returned to the household. By the following morning it had vanished. Lucy was once more deathly pale. It was as though every drop of new life had disappeared during the night. A second transfusion followed, then another. Dr. Seward gave his blood. Quincy Morris gave his. Each sacrifice brought the same brief improvement. Each morning the dreadful weakness returned. Van Helsing said nothing of the thoughts growing stronger within his own mind. He dared not speak them aloud, for if he was correct, science alone could not save Lucy. They faced an enemy older than medicine itself. Meanwhile, strange events disturbed the countryside around Whitby. Children disappeared briefly while playing near the old churchyard. None were seriously harmed, yet each returned frightened and confused. Several spoke of a beautiful lady dressed in white. She had smiled kindly. She had asked them to come closer. Some remembered no more. Others complained of soreness around their throats. The stories spread rapidly. Adults dismissed them as childish imagination. Van Helsing did not. One evening, Lucy seemed calmer than she had in weeks. Arthur sat beside her bed, holding her hand. She spoke gently of happier days, and thanked him for never leaving her. For a moment, they almost believed the worst had passed. Then her breathing slowed. Her fingers relaxed within his. With one final peaceful sigh, Lucy Westenra died. Arthur bowed his head in grief. Dr. Seward could offer no comfort. Even Quincy Morris, usually so full of courage, stood in silent sorrow. Only Van Helsing continued watching Lucy's face. His sadness was mixed with something else, not surprise and expectation. Lucy was buried with great dignity. Flowers covered her coffin. Friends spoke lovingly of her generous spirit. Arthur could scarcely bear to leave the graveside. He believed his beloved now rested peacefully. Van Helsing knew peace had not yet come. Only days later, newspapers began reporting a curious mystery. Children continued disappearing near the cemetery. Each returned unharmed, but strangely weak. Again they described the same beautiful lady. Again small wounds appeared upon their necks. The newspapers nicknamed the mysterious figure the Lady in White. Most readers found the stories amusing. Van Helsing read every word with growing certainty. At last he gathered the others. There were truths, he said, that modern science had forgotten, but ancient people had feared for centuries. Creatures that fed upon the living. Creatures that walked only after sunset. Creatures that grew stronger with every victim they claimed. He spoke one word. Vampire! Silence filled the room. No one wished to believe him. Yet no ordinary explanation remained. That night, Van Helsing persuaded Seward to accompany him to Lucy's tomb. The heavy stone door stood slightly open. Neither man had touched it. Together they stepped inside. Lucy's coffin lay before them. It was empty. Dr. Seward stared in disbelief. Moments later they heard footsteps outside. A pale woman approached through the moonlight. In her arms she carried a small child. Her face was unmistakably Lucy's, yet the sweetness they had loved had vanished. Her eyes gleamed with unnatural hunger. When she saw the men, she dropped the child unharmed upon the grass. With astonishing speed, she fled into the darkness. By the time they reached the coffin again, she lay within it once more, motionless as death. Dr. Seward's world changed forever. Van Helsing insisted that Arthur must see the truth with his own eyes. Though the thought seemed unbearably cruel, Arthur agreed. The following evening the four friends entered the tomb together. Jonathan and Mina had not yet been told everything. This burden belonged first to those who had loved Lucy most. Again the coffin was empty. Again they waited in silence. At last Lucy appeared. She seemed more beautiful than ever. Her cheeks glowed with unnatural colour. Her smile was gentle, almost loving. When she recognized Arthur, she stretched out her arms. "My love," she whispered. Her voice sounded sweet enough to break his heart. For one terrible moment, Arthur stepped forward. Van Helsing caught his arm. "That is not Lucy!" The woman before them smiled again. This time every man saw the long white teeth behind her lips. The illusion shattered. She hissed with sudden fury before retreating into the tomb. When dawn approached, Van Helsing explained what must be done. It would seem monstrous, yet it was an act of mercy. The creature inside the coffin wore Lucy's face, but Lucy herself was gone. Only by destroying the vampire could her soul finally rest. With tears upon his face, Arthur accepted the terrible duty. He drove a wooden stake through the vampire's heart. The tomb echoed with one final cry that seemed both dreadful and strangely sorrowful. Then silence. When they looked again, Lucy's features had changed. The unnatural beauty had disappeared. In its place rested the peaceful face they remembered. The fear had gone. The hunger had gone. At last, she truly slept. Outside the cemetery, the first light of dawn spread across the sky. None of them spoke for several minutes. Each understood that the battle before them had only just begun. Somewhere in England, the master who had stolen Lucy's life still walked beneath the cover of darkness, and sooner or later, he would come again. The morning after Lucy's release, her friends gathered in Dr. Seward's study. None of them had slept. The night's terrible duty weighed heavily upon every heart, yet beneath the sorrow lay something else. Resolve. For the first time, they understood exactly what they faced. The evil that had claimed Lucy was neither legend nor nightmare. It was real. And while Count Dracula still walked the earth, no one they loved would ever truly be safe. At Van Helsing's request, Jonathan Harker finally opened the notebook he had carried ever since escaping Castle Dracula. Until now he had almost wished to forget its contents. Reading those pages meant returning to every fearful memory. Yet if Dracula was indeed the same nobleman who had imprisoned him in Transylvania, then his account might provide the key to defeating him. Jonathan began to read. He described the lonely journey through the Carpathian Mountains, the frightened villagers, the coach that seemed to appear from nowhere, the wolves gathering silently beside the road, the endless corridors of the castle, the locked doors, the three pale women, the boxes of earth, the impossible climb to freedom. No one interrupted. Even Dr. Seward, a man devoted to science and reason, could no longer dismiss such things as the fantasies of an exhausted traveller. Every word fitted perfectly with what they themselves had witnessed. When Jonathan finished, the room remained silent. Van Helsing rose slowly. "There is no longer any doubt," he said quietly. "The Count who imprisoned Jonathan is the same creature who destroyed Lucy." Mina listened carefully, as each person added their own experiences. Dr. Seward produced his medical notes. Van Helsing explained his observations. Arthur recounted Lucy's final weeks. Quincy described the courage he had seen in every member of the group. Mina suggested something simple. "If we gather everything together," she said, "perhaps we shall see what none of us could see alone." Over the following days she worked tirelessly. She copied diaries, she typed letters, she arranged telegrams, newspaper reports, and journal entries into careful order. Piece by piece the scattered fragments became a single story. Dates matched, places aligned. Events that had once seemed unrelated now formed a clear pattern. Dracula had travelled to England aboard the doomed ship. He had established hidden refuges throughout London. He ventured out after sunset to feed, always returning before dawn to rest within the earth of his homeland. For the first time, they possessed not merely courage, but knowledge. Van Helsing explained why the boxes of earth mattered so greatly. The Count cannot simply rest anywhere, he said. He draws strength from the soil of his native land. Without it, he becomes vulnerable. If every box could be found and made useless, Dracula would lose his places of safety. He would have nowhere left to hide. The hunt began. Their first destination was an abandoned house connected with the Count's recent purchases. The building stood empty and neglected. Broken windows admitted cold autumn air. Dust covered every floor, yet beneath the silence they sensed another presence. Jonathan recognized the smell immediately. Fresh earth. Together they forced open a cellar door. There they found it, one of Dracula's great wooden boxes. Inside lay the dark Transylvanian soil that had travelled across Europe. Van Helsing knelt beside it. From his satchel he produced a small silver crucifix and a wafer that had been blessed during Holy Communion. With solemn care he placed the sacred symbols within the box. "The earth is now forbidden to him," he explained. "He may never rest here again." It was a small victory, but it was their first. Over the following weeks they searched tirelessly across London. Some properties stood in lonely districts. Others hid among busy streets where no one suspected their unusual purpose. Again and again they found another box. Again and again Van Helsing purified the earth within it. With every success, Dracula's freedom narrowed. The hunter was slowly becoming the hunted. Yet Dracula was no ordinary enemy. He seemed always aware of their movements. Once, as Jonathan and Quincy searched an old warehouse, they heard heavy footsteps above them. They rushed upstairs. Only a broken window greeted them. Outside, a great bat disappeared into the darkness. Another evening, Dr. Seward glimpsed a tall figure watching from the far end of a deserted street. Before anyone else reached the spot, it had vanished. The Count was observing them, learning, waiting. Throughout these dangerous days, Mina remained the calm center of the group. She organized every discovery. She compared maps and timetables. She noticed details everyone else overlooked. Even Van Helsing marveled at her clear mind. "You have the courage of a man," he once said before smiling apologetically. "No. Greater still, you have the patience and wisdom that all of us together sometimes lack." Jonathan smiled with quiet pride. Without Mina they would still be chasing shadows. At last they believed they had gained the advantage. Only a handful of the Count's resting places remained. Surely he would soon be forced to flee? They underestimated one thing. A cornered predator is often at its most dangerous. Late one evening, after the friends had returned from another successful search, a strange unease settled over the house. The servants could not be found. A door that should have been locked stood slightly open. Jonathan, exhausted from the day's work, had fallen into a deep sleep. Van Helsing paused. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Without another word, the group hurried towards Mina's room. Behind the closed door, Count Dracula was waiting. Van Helsing reached Mina's door first. It would not open. Something held it fast from within. Jonathan awoke at the sound of frantic voices and rushed into the corridor, still dazed from sleep. Together, the men threw their weight against the heavy oak door until the lock splintered and the room burst open. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The scene before them was almost beyond belief. Mina lay upon the bed, her nightdress stained with blood. Her face was pale with terror, yet she was fully conscious. Above her stood Count Dracula. His eyes burned like embers in the darkness. One hand gripped Mina's shoulders so tightly she could scarcely move. With the other, he held her head against a wound upon his own chest. He forced her to drink. The moment the door flew open, the Count turned with a snarl, unlike any human sound. Van Helsing raised his crucifix. The vampire recoiled instantly, his expression twisting with rage. For an instant he seemed to blur, as though his body were made of mist and shadow instead of flesh. Then, with impossible speed, he slipped through the broken window and vanished into the night. Only the cold wind remained. Jonathan fell to his knees beside Mina. She clung to him, shaking uncontrollably. "I tried to resist," she whispered. "I truly tried." "No blame belongs to you," Jonathan replied, holding her close. Van Helsing examined the wound upon her throat. His face grew grave. "The Count has not merely attacked you," he said quietly. "He has bound himself to you." The room fell silent. Dr. Seward understood, before anyone spoke, the dreadful possibility. If Dracula lived long enough, Mina herself might one day share his terrible fate. Jonathan looked from face to face. There must be some way to save her. "There is," Van Helsing answered. "We must destroy Dracula." Although frightened, Mina refused to surrender to despair. "If I am connected to him," she said after a long silence, "perhaps that connection can help us." Van Helsing looked at her thoughtfully. It was a dangerous idea, yet perhaps she was right. The following morning he placed Mina into a light hypnotic sleep. Her breathing slowed. Her expression became strangely distant. "What do you hear?" Van Helsing asked gently. For several moments she remained silent. Then she spoke. "I hear water. Nothing more, only the steady rhythm of waves striking wood." They repeated the experiment at sunset. Again Mina entered the strange trance. Again she listened to sounds no one else could hear. "He is still upon the water," she murmured. "The ship is moving." Van Helsing's eyes brightened. Dracula had fled England. The Count had realized his remaining hiding places were no longer safe. He was attempting to return to Transylvania. They still had a chance to stop him. Using shipping records, railway timetables, and Mina's remarkable organization, the friends traced the likely route. The Count's last remaining box of earth had been loaded aboard a vessel bound for the continent. From there it would travel inland by river and road until it reached the Carpathian Mountains. "It will be a race," Quincy Morris said. "If we move quickly enough, we can reach him before he reaches the castle." No one hesitated. Each understood that failure meant far more than Dracula's escape. Every passing day strengthened the bond between the Count and Mina. Time itself had become their enemy. The companions divided their journey. Jonathan and Arthur travelled by rail, determined to intercept the wagon carrying Dracula's final coffin before it reached the mountains. Quincy rode beside them whenever the terrain allowed, his cheerful courage lifting everyone's spirits even during the hardest days. Dr. Seward accompanied them, keeping careful notes despite the exhaustion of constant travel. Van Helsing chose another path. He would travel with Mina directly towards Castle Dracula. Though reluctant to expose her to further danger, he believed she would be safest under his protection. More importantly, Mina's strange connection with the Count might still reveal his movements. Winter settled across Eastern Europe. Snow covered forests and mountain passes. The roads became treacherous. More than once, horses struggled through drifts that reached their chests. Each dawn, Van Helsing hypnotized Mina. Each dawn she reported fewer sounds. "The ship has stopped." "The wagon is moving." "The horses are climbing." Every answer brought them closer. Every answer reminded Mina that somewhere ahead, the creature who had scarred her soul still endured. One evening, as the sky darkened over the mountains, Mina suddenly shivered. "He knows," she whispered. "He knows we are following him." Van Helsing looked around the lonely pass. The wind had fallen strangely still. No birds sang, no animals stirred. Only silence surrounded them. "We must not stop," he said. "If he reaches the castle before us, all may yet be lost." The following afternoon, the broken towers of Castle Dracula appeared upon the distant ridge. Even in daylight it seemed abandoned by the world. The stone walls rose above the snow, like the bones of some ancient giant. Jonathan had escaped those walls months before. Now, unknowingly, all their paths were leading back to the place where the nightmare had begun. And as the sun slowly descended behind the mountains, the final reckoning drew near. The mountains stood silent beneath a blanket of fresh snow. Van Helsing and Mina reached the outskirts of Castle Dracula before nightfall. The fortress rose above them exactly as Jonathan had described it, its towers broken by time, its walls weathered by centuries of wind, and its windows staring across the valley like empty eyes. No smoke rose from its chimneys, no voices echoed through its halls. Yet the professor knew better than to mistake silence for safety. They made camp within sight of the castle. Before darkness fell, Van Helsing drew a protective circle around Mina, using blessed symbols, asking her not to step beyond it until sunrise, whatever she might hear. "I trust you," Mina said quietly. "You must trust yourself," he replied. When night descended, the wind carried faint laughter across the snow. 3 graceful figures emerged from the darkness. Beautiful women, clothed in flowing white, moved towards the camp with effortless elegance. Their faces were serene, almost angelic, yet their eyes held the same terrible hunger Jonathan had once described. They stopped at the edge of the sacred circle. One smiled gently. "Come with us," she whispered to Mina. "You belong with us now." For a fleeting moment, Mina felt the pull of their voices. Somewhere, deep within her, the shadow Dracula had left behind stirred uneasily. She lowered her eyes and gripped the crucifix around her neck. "I belong with my husband." The women smiled no longer. Their beauty hardened into something ancient and cruel. Unable to cross the sacred barrier, they retreated into the darkness, waiting for another opportunity. Van Helsing kept watch until dawn. When the first light touched the mountains, he climbed alone to the castle. Its great doors hung open. Dust lay thick upon the floors. Every chamber seemed abandoned, as though no living soul had walked there for generations. Yet deep beneath the fortress, he found what he had expected: 3 ancient coffins. Within each lay one of the pale women, motionless in daylight, their terrible beauty untouched by time. The professor stood quietly for several moments. There was sadness in his expression. Long ago, these had surely been ordinary women, with ordinary hopes and ordinary lives. Only Dracula's curse had transformed them into monsters. With solemn determination, he performed the dreadful task he had come to accomplish. One by one, he ended their long imprisonment. When it was finished, peace settled over the crypt. The strange sense of evil that had filled the castle for centuries seemed to lift, if only slightly. Van Helsing closed the ancient doors behind him. Castle Dracula would never again shelter those voices that had haunted Jonathan on his first terrible night. Far to the south, the others raced through the mountain passes. Jonathan Harker, Arthur Holmwood, Dr. Seward, and Quincy Morris followed every clue they could gather from frightened villagers. At last, they learned that a wagon had recently passed along the frozen road, carrying a single, heavy wooden box. It could only be Dracula. They urged their horses onward. The daylight was already fading. If the Count reached his castle before sunset, he might yet escape them. Near a narrow mountain pass, they finally saw the wagon. Its horses strained through the snow, while armed men rode beside it, determined to protect their mysterious cargo. Jonathan drew rein. "There!" he shouted. The chase began. The drivers lashed their horses forward. Quincy and Arthur swept around one side of the convoy, while Seward followed close behind. Jonathan rode directly towards the wagon. The road erupted into confusion. Horses reared, men shouted, steel flashed in the fading light. The Count's loyal followers fought fiercely, knowing their master's survival depended upon reaching the castle before the sun disappeared. Jonathan forced his way through the struggle until he reached the wagon itself. With a single powerful blow, he cut the ropes securing the great wooden box. It crashed heavily into the snow. The coffin burst open. There lay Count Dracula. His eyes remained closed. His face was pale as marble. Yet even in daylight there lingered an unmistakable power, as though he needed only a few more moments for darkness to restore his strength. "The sun is setting!" cried Arthur. Jonathan did not hesitate. With all the strength born of months of fear and determination, he slashed across Dracula's throat. At that same instant, Quincey Morris reached the fallen coffin. Ignoring the fierce resistance around him, he drove his knife deep into the Count's heart. For one extraordinary moment, everything became still. Dracula's eyes flew open, not with anger, not with triumph, but with something almost resembling surprise. Then his body began to change. The flesh crumbled, the ancient face withered before their eyes. Centuries passed in a heartbeat. A gust of mountain wind swept across the snow, carrying the last traces of the vampire away like drifting ash. The Count of Castle Dracula was no more. Silence settled over the mountains. Then Jonathan heard Mina cry out in the distance. He turned. The faint scar upon her forehead, the mark left by Dracula's terrible curse, had vanished. Colour returned to her face. The unseen chain that had bound them together had finally been broken. She was free. Jonathan embraced her, scarcely believing the nightmare had truly ended. Van Helsing smiled for the first time in many days. "God be thanked," he whispered. Yet victory had demanded its price. During the struggle, Quincey Morris had been gravely wounded. His friends carried him to a place overlooking the mountains, where the last light of day painted the snow with soft gold. He looked at each of them in turn. "There are worse ways to leave the world," he said with a tired smile. "We finished what we came to do." Arthur clasped his hand. Dr. Seward bowed his head. Jonathan thanked him for a courage no words could adequately honour. Mina knelt beside him, tears quietly falling. Quincey's gaze rested upon the dark silhouette of the castle one final time. "It can never hurt anyone again." Those were among his last words. As evening settled across the mountains, he slipped peacefully from this life, surrounded by friends. Years passed. The horrors they had endured slowly became memories rather than daily fears. Jonathan and Mina built the peaceful life that had once seemed impossible. They were blessed with a son, whom they named Quincey, in honor of the brave friend whose sacrifice had helped save them all. Often they gathered with Arthur, Dr. Seward, and Van Helsing, remembering not only the darkness they had faced, but the courage that had carried them through it. The professor would sometimes smile and say that evil had not been defeated by strength alone. It had been overcome by loyalty, by friendship, by ordinary people refusing to surrender when fear told them they should. High in the Carpathian mountains, Castle Dracula still stood. Its towers slowly crumbled beneath winter snow. Its halls echoed only with the wind. The wolves still roamed the forests. Travellers still hurried past the lonely pass before darkness fell. Legends, after all, rarely disappear completely. Yet the ancient evil that had once ruled those silent stones had passed into history. And wherever Jonathan and Mina looked upon the sunrise together, they remembered that no night, however long or terrible, can endure forever. Every dawn is a quiet promise that hope returns, that love outlasts fear, and that even the darkest shadow must, in time, yield to the light. Thank you for listening to Dracula, an original abridged adaptation, inspired by Bram Stoker's classic Gothic novel. Though this retelling has drawn to a close, the echoes of its story continue to linger, within lonely castles, moonlit landscapes, windswept churchyards, and the enduring struggle between darkness and light. For well over a century, Dracula has captivated readers with its atmosphere, unforgettable characters, and timeless questions about courage, friendship, sacrifice, and hope. This adaptation has sought to honor the spirit of that remarkable novel while offering a fresh and concise journey through its haunting world. Whether you joined this tale for its Gothic mystery, its rich storytelling, or simply to unwind beside the comforting glow of a fire, I hope these moments have carried you somewhere memorable. If you enjoyed this adaptation, there are many more classic stories and poems waiting to be rediscovered. Until next time, thank you for listening. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with peaceful places rather than shadowed castles. Sleep well.